Welcome to Season 2 of Ripple Effect Connection. I'm your host, Christy Hugic, here to bridge the gap between impactful messages and inspiring messengers. My mission is simple: ignite transformative discussions that create a ripple effect of positive change in your life and the lives of others. I'm also going to ask you a favor. If something resonates, share it. The more you share the podcast, the more the community grows, the more we're able to help people who may need it. If you've got a minute, leave a review on Apple Podcasts. This helps me bring you more incredible guests in Season 2 and beyond. Today, we're diving into something that affects us all: stress. Here's a fact that might surprise you. 90% of chronic conditions and dis-ease can be traced back to stress in the body. Think about that. We're not just talking about the stress of a busy day or just the stress of that one traffic jam you were in. We're talking about how unresolved stress builds and rewires your nervous system, setting off a chain reaction that can lead to illness and chronic conditions. When symptoms manifest from this, it's your body's way of telling you that something's out of balance. This is why I'm so excited to welcome back Dr. Janine Kreft to the podcast. She's a mental wellness coach who works with clients around the world. She joined us in Season 1, and she's back by popular demand. Her insights have been transformative in my own healing journey, and today we're tackling what often goes unspoken: how negative self-talk, unregulated stress, and ignoring the body's signals keep us stuck in a cycle of illness. More importantly, we'll talk about how you can break free from these cycles. We'll dive into some of the toughest questions and topics I hear from clients, like how long to stick with nervous system tools before trying something new, how to create real ease in your life, and why having a clear vision is so powerful. Plus, Dr. Kreft has a new project she's sharing. She's got an update on her non-alcoholic, health-focused mocktails that mix wellness with fun. This episode is packed with actionable tools to help you manage stress and find more balance in your life and in your thoughts. So let's jump into my conversation with the one and only Dr. Janine Kreft. My first repeat guest. There she is, honored. Back in the flesh. Dr. Janine Kreft. I knew when we did our first episode, I wanted to have you back again because there's so much to talk about and there's no way we get to it in one episode. So welcome back.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I know we could just jam out for hours and hours and hours.
Yes, for sure. I know you've always got a lot going on and you're always doing so much stuff. So I thank you for taking the time for everyone. Everyone loved the episode last year. So we're going to try and give them some little tidbits. I kind of based all my questions today that are coming to you on things I hear a lot of recently. There's a couple of them that I know I touched on during last season, but we don't always assume everyone hears everything from last season. So one thing we did talk about last season with you, we talked about energy, being an energy healer. How does one become energy fluent? Kind of give them the basics of that if they didn't hear the episode last year.
Yeah, sure. And even if we repeat anything, it's going to be completely new information because I am different this year. You're different. So it's like we're going to hear things and I'm going to talk about things different. So, and I always think repetition is great for learning as well. But energy fluent really is a term that I came up with when I was trying to explain to people what it is that I'm doing and how they can do it for themselves. Because ultimately, our first language is energy. Everything's energy. And we are simply using words, like right now I'm using English words to translate an energy that I'm experiencing right now to help folks comprehend what I'm experiencing. That's it. And so when I'm helping folks with rewiring their minds, their beliefs and whatnot, they have to be clear on what is their nervous system state, because that's a particular energy that's coming through. And then their thoughts and beliefs are going to match that state. And I know we'll talk about that later, but that is something that folks really need to be clear on, because once you start to tune into the energy, you can wipe away all the BS that your mind is feeding you. Your ego's feeding you thoughts and judgments and what you think you should do or not do, but it might not match the energy at all. So ultimately, people can create really fast healing when they become energy fluent.
Yeah, and it's a hurdle. It's a hurdle. I mean, it's just the awareness. Sometimes it's a hurdle. We have to start with that, and it's a hurdle just to do that. And then we have these people, and I kind of think I've been this way too, that we want to say, okay, we're aware. We know there's something that we want to change, but we've been a certain way for so long. How do you overcome that hurdle to become something different? Because people will say, well, you'll never change. You never change. So what would you say to that?
Can't teach an old dog new tricks, right? Well, to me, when we've been a certain way for a long time, it just means that is a well-rehearsed pattern. It's a well-rehearsed train of thought. It's a well-rehearsed belief. So if you've been stuck in a pessimistic, negative outlook on life, it just means that that's rehearsed. And I tell folks, it's kind of like that thought pattern has gone to the gym every day, 7 days a week, and has gotten really strong, versus your optimistic point of view on life hasn't been to the gym in years, maybe took a little stretch class once every 10 years, right? So it's not as activated. So it really comes down to rehearsing what you desire. And ultimately, for people to make change, unfortunately, sometimes we have to be in some sort of pain or suffering before we're really going to make an active change. So I was curious too with this question, because it might be helpful to bring up an example, like a particular hurdle that you see a lot with your clients, and then we can speak to that directly. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think the hurdle is too, it's like what you're saying. There are things they've rehearsed and done, and they don't know any other script, right? They don't know any other script. I have clients who, even let's just say cooking, they don't do a ton of, let's start simple, like something like home cooking, right? And I know that's more, it's not a mental thing per se, but home cooking is something they've never done, and they don't know how to incorporate that in their life and change the fact that they've eaten out or someone else has cooked for them their whole life, and now they want to quote unquote be a healthier person, and this is kind of part of the deal, and they struggle to get there.
Okay, cool. So that's a really great example. So something that I would look at then with folks is taking them down path of least resistance, meaning what is going to be the easiest way to get you from point A to point B, even if it's like the long scenic route. Because ultimately, as long as you're doing one step in front of the other, you're going to get there eventually, even if you're taking the longer route. So like two things that popped into my mind right away were what would it take to do some sort of like home service where you're getting healthy, partly cooked meals, or meals that are where you put it together. They've given you the ingredients, one of those memberships, and then you put it together. They have the instructions right there. So that kind of takes some of the guesswork out of it, is one thing I would look at if that felt light for them to choose. Another one would be, okay, why don't you just start exploring on social media like YouTube or even TikTok some of your favorite cooks or people who are cooking meals, and just get excited about it. Find somebody who you resonate with. What are they making that you really love? Because once they get excited, then that kind of helps overcome the hump, the barrier there, and being able to just follow that for fun. Because if people get in their heads about it, like I have to be like now this all-star chef and I have to cook it perfect and this doesn't taste good and right, and they go in all this judgment, it's like, forget it, I'm just going to eat out. We need to take a step back and make the process easier to choose.
And just a little side note too, that to interject, the other coaches at the clinic actually laugh at me because of the number of times that I say whatever creates ease, because that is something that you taught me that I swear it is, this sounds like the simplest phrase. I must repeat it multiple times a day. I was on Marco Polo with a client, a personal client today, and she was talking about doing this and doing that. And I said, well, what would create ease for you? Like, which of these versions would create ease for you? Let's go with that one. I'm for that. Yeah. So I use that all the time. And I think you're right. When you're starting, it's got to be easy. And if you're making it difficult and you're trying to cook 5-course meals, I think the other thing I find too with people with kids, they're trying to do this, right? And they want to, they're like, I have kids, I have a family, I can't do this. involving their kids if they're old enough, where they can
Yeah.
involve the kids in the process so the kids get excited about it, or they think that the kids won't eat that food because this food is healthy, So there's a lot of hurt. We could probably spend the whole hour on picking apart how to, get someone into the home cooking phase. But we talk about the importance of having a vision. And I think when someone's chronically sick, it's really important, but it's pretty much important if you want to make any change. So you talk about creating the unrealistic. I've seen you say that before. What do you mean by that, and what goes into that?
Yeah, well, we've normalized we're normalized to worry. Like, it's just very common to worry and to become to this kind of doomsday thought process, which is, well, you'll have this diagnosis for life, and no, you're just going to be stuck here. You got to take these medications for life. This is just the way it is. And so that becomes people's realistic. Like, I got to be realistic. I can't be pie in the sky or get my hopes up, etc. And I'm kind of like, well, whatever you believe, you create. Because your mind quite literally keeps reflecting back to you everything you believe in any current moment, which is kind of unreal. Like, we can literally delete things out of our visual field if it doesn't match our current belief system. And there's been tons of research on this. But especially with someone who's had chronic illness, it might feel unrealistic that they could heal or that they could recover completely from this. So I like to meet people where they're at and kind of gauge that. And then I'll just question, well, what if it was possible? Like, poke holes in the belief. What if it was possible that you could completely remit from this? If that was possible, what would you be choosing right now? Right? So all of a sudden now their brain has melted a little bit from the jail cell of the beliefs. And it's like, wait, well, okay, what if that was possible? Now they're going to start looking in their environment to confirm it to be true. Oh, well, I've seen this person heal. Well, I've seen that person heal. Okay. And then it's like, now the momentum is going to create something they didn't think was possible. So I tell people, don't be realistic. Whatever you've decided is true. That's just an interesting point of view. That's just something you've believed in the past, but it doesn't have to be true for you.
Yeah. And it's so profound. It's just hard to get them started, but I love your method of just, because you're immediately kind of forcing them to think differently, right?
Yeah.
In the nicest way, you're forcing them to think differently right away.
Yeah.
And then when they get away from you, the negative self-talk maybe creeps in, right? So what kind of a roadblock does negative self-talk provide?
A huge one. And really, when I'm working with people, I'm working on these kind of major areas: self-talk, inner monologue, nervous system regulation, and point of focus. And it's funny that you say that. Like, it's almost like I don't allow you that thought process, in that I am going to sit from the vantage point of, I believe something unrealistic can happen for you. And I'm going to hold that energy, and I'm not going to meet you where you're at in your limited mindset, because that's how I get you up to where I'm at. Does that make sense? So the roadblock is huge for folks because it all starts in the mind's eye first. That's where it originates. And so if you can't see it in here or feel it to some degree, then you don't have a trajectory for where you're going. You're going to go where the mindset is telling you. I mean, this is why athletes are rehearsing in their mind ahead of time a perfect performance, the unrealistic, right? We see it happen all the time. It was so cool. I think during the Olympics, I don't know if you saw it, but they caught a video image of like Simone Biles sitting there meditating or mentally rehearsing or whatever she was doing. And I was like, I love that, because that's exactly it. They're getting themselves in the right headspace before executing something very difficult. And I see it just the same as someone recovering from physical illness or chronic illness. You got to get in the right headspace to help yourself heal, because ultimately your cells are listening constantly and they're reflecting back what's going on in the mind.
And I think, and there's no way to have this conversation without bringing judgment into it, but I also think it's like the second things don't go well or go that as scripted version, they become self-deprecating.
Yep.
So what do you tell people about that? Because again, they get away from you, and then I know what's going on when they're away from you, and you'll get a patient that like They will pop on the Zoom screen for an appointment, and I know they've been not compliant. There's something awry. You can see it. And the negative self-talk starts in, and you hear those goods, those bads, those judgment words. So what happens what do you kind of advise people about that?
Yeah. So then the other thing that we're training besides inner monologue, and it kind of goes hand in hand, is point of focus. What are you focusing on most of the time? Because if you are focused on pain, illness, suffering, it's like more and more of that happens. And so then we want to look at, okay, well, what would it take to focus more on wellness, feeling good? And that's the hard part, especially when people aren't experiencing that, right? They're experiencing symptoms in real time. It's almost hard to outcreate that, but that is what they're being called to do, to challenge their mind to strengthen focus on what they desire versus what they don't. And most of the time, what we do is we focus on what we don't because it's like what we see, it's what in our current reality, right? So it feels very tangible. It's like, well, this is what it is. How can I not focus on anything else? And I say, well, focus is ultimately a choice, but it doesn't feel that way because you've rehearsed something so long. There's so much momentum built in it that it's challenging to shift. But you can think of the shift the same way you go to the gym and do reps, or I go to yoga and I do chaturanga. It's like, right, every time I do that, I strengthen my ability to focus on what I'm desiring to create.
Yeah, and I think, I try, and I don't know if you would say this is a good way to handle it, but I just try to get them focused on the learning process that just took place. Of like, okay, yeah, you wanted to do something else or you wanted a different result, but let's talk about why we got the result we did and how we can get the one you want the next time. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And right there in your facilitation of the client, you're coming from a very non-judgmental state, right? You're not saying, well, it's wrong or it's bad that you're in the state you are in. It just is what it is. So what else is possible here? How can we get to this other place? Again, not right or wrong. It's just, this is your preference to feel better. And that makes sense. So what does it take to shift your focus and get going down that road?
Yeah. We can't have you on without talking more about the nervous system exactly and its role. And I know you provided some really great tips and insight in season one. And there's kind of a subtopic I want to talk about here, and it's come up recently. You have all the tools. So say someone has like your nervous system sanctuary, right? And it has all those tools that you have in there. I want to talk about the difference between doing things to check off a box and actually doing the practice for benefits, because sometimes I feel like some patients are just checking the box, but they're not truly getting the actual benefit of the practice. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And so I see it a lot of times, and I go to a local Pilates yoga studio. And so I see it oftentimes in these fitness classes where, especially when they're low impact, it's like, that's great. You can go to the class and not really activate your muscles, not really activate your body. And you'll get some benefit, but you won't get as much benefit as you could if you were really focused on that mind-body connection. So it really comes down to, I can't just sit down and be like, okay, let me do some breath work and tapping, and okay, I did it, X off that off the box. Now I'm running on to the next thing. It's like, no, I'm coming down to sit here and really train my mind to be present and aware in this moment and see how it's shifting my body the best of my abilities. And then I'm going to get more out of it, because it's kind of like, what's the point of doing it if you're not going to be mindful in the process? Now, I will say there are plenty of times when I sit down and meditate and I'm like, oh my God, this is a struggle. My head is like so distracted. And to me, the fact that I made effort to redirect my attention over and over again, that's a win, because I sat down and did it. It's a very imperfect process, but I showed up to the best that I could that day, right? But if I'm just like, I sit down and I'm not putting any effort into it, then we just don't get the results we're looking for usually.
Well, and sometimes though, they'll ask, how do I know it's working? Like, sometimes they really aren't sure if they're doing something and they are reaping the rewards of it. So what would you say if someone were to say to you, how do I know it's working?
Yeah. Yeah. Right. It's kind of like sometimes these changes happen so slowly or they're just so subtle that we don't notice. So I'll ask them questions to bring awareness to maybe things they were complaining about before. Like, oh, well, how have you been sleeping lately? Oh, well, yeah, you know what? I haven't woken up in the past couple nights. Let me check my ring or my sleep score on my app and see what's going on. Right. So it's kind of just bringing their attention to seeing the benefits in real time. As well as me reflecting back to them what I'm noticing energetically in session, just how is their energy different? And oftentimes folks, as I work with them, their energy becomes more grounded, they become lighter, more expansive, right? And then I know that we are shifting energy. But something, and I remember this with you, was like, having that biofeedback is just so helpful, especially when you're like, I don't know if this is changing anything, but if you have some sort of device that's giving you real-time feedback to see the differences in your body, that can be really reinforcing because you're going to see it there first before maybe you actually experience the maybe changes on the outside, like let's say the weight loss or things like that.
Yeah. And when we started, I tell some patients the story all the time that my HRV was in the teens. And in the like 13, 20, 22, 25, I'm in the 60s now.
And that's so good.
And I have a bad week. Like, I don't feel like I've slept great this week because I've just been busy and I've been just staying up too late, working on the computer, like not shutting down the blue light and early enough and just getting relaxed. And yet it's still in like the high 50s. So, it is. I do think the feedback does help. And I think people are looking for it. And I think it's also one of those things where you might not know when it's working, but you know when it's not.
Exactly.
Right? Because things are going poorly. Things are going poorly. You don't feel well. I asked one of the lymphatic drainage guys about this one time on Instagram. And I was like, how do you tell people or how do you know that it's working? Because lymphatics is not like, you get a lymphatic drainage massage, right? No, you don't even feel it. Like it's very light. So people don't think they're doing anything. And he said, you just know when it doesn't work, when it's not working, and when things aren't going right, So I always keep that in mind. And then how long this is another thing that comes up. I tried practice X and it just didn't work for me. How do you know the tools are actually working, and how long should you try something? How does someone figure out when it's time to move on to maybe try a different modality?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first, with any sort of modality, and I teach a lot of them to give my clients kind of like the buffet, you're not going to like it all. That's cool. But when you try it, give things a try and see what's resonating, see what feels easy to stick with in the beginning. Right? To kind of get some momentum. So whatever feels easy. If there's something like, oh, I tried this once, but it didn't really do anything, so I'm going to drop it. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. Are you having some resistance about it or what's coming up? Right? So I might kind of explore that. And so people want to differentiate. Is it, I have some sort of resistance and it's actually going to create change for me? Or is this really not for me? It's not aligned with where I'm at right now. So really, you can just ask yourself a question to get really honest, radically honest with yourself, truthful with yourself. Okay, well, truth, will this create greater for my life if I choose this?
Yeah.
That's it. And then do you get an intuitive yes or no, or an intuitive lightness or heaviness? Because if it's light, and even though you're like, I don't want to do this, but it feels light, so let me give it a try and see what happens. And oftentimes I'll see people like go through, maybe it's a breath work, and then they have a nice emotional release, and it's, their body's just resisting giving that up, letting go of some of that. So it's just differentiating between the two.
And I think we also have been giving patients, the passive nervous system regulation tools. Like I have on here, this is the Apollo Neuro, which is vibration.
I haven't tried those.
So I do like the idea of passive ways to do that. Is that something that you've seen benefits with? Because I will also say that I was like this. When I first put it on, it actually agitated me. So I actually took that because I've heard other people say the same thing. we are probably the people that need it the most. And I actually was like, I think I'm going to leave this thing on and I'm going to just try to get through this. I mean, you can control the level of the vibration so that it's not as heavy, and there are different vibrations for doing different things. But what I love is it's set. I don't pay attention to it. It just goes off at certain times of the day. Now, if, like, I have a really hard meeting and I want to calm down right away, I can put a calm setting on. But I'm going to tell you, at first, it doesn't work. So I was wondering if that's the same thing. Now, this is passive and you're talking about active things. But if someone's resistant to it in the beginning, is that a sign that they need it more?
Possibly. I've never used those passive devices, and you've definitely piqued my interest about it. But what I'm getting is it's a specific vibration that it's calling you to match. Right? So it's offering you, hey, this is a relaxing vibration. Will you come up to meet it? And if you're too far off from it, you're going to feel agitated. This is why when people who start meditating and they haven't done enough nervous system regulation, they can have a panic attack because they're trying to bring themselves down too fast and the body's not ready for it. So it's like the body's not ready to feel safe in that very high vibrational state, because a relaxed state is high vibrational. Right. And so I would just, again, notice kind of like, okay, I'm resistant to this. This doesn't mean a no. It just means I should look at this. Truth, like, what could I do? Could I just turn it down a little bit, give that a try? Does that feel light to choose? Or am I really not ready for this? Because obviously someone who's having a panic attack during meditation, I say, you're not ready for meditation. Let's do lighter or, more active nervous system regulation tools that aren't going to have you in that deep state that are going to trigger that.
Yeah, it's so individual. But I think it was probably about 3 days or so where I was just like, this is kind of agitating me when I feel it. And I did mess with the levels of it, and I've messed with putting it, because you can put it on different parts of your body too. So, and we do try to give that to people because, they are struggling so much with the active. You want to try to give them something supportive that they don't have to think about if they're too busy. So it's probably a good tool. Do I think it's as good as, I don't know that it's as, I don't want to make a judgment about it. I want to say it's supportive of what you're already doing. I wouldn't not do the active stuff at all and just rely on this either, because it's valuable to be able to do it yourself. So we got all kinds of tools and tricks out there, but I think similar, but not exactly the same. We talked about working when things work on the subconscious mind, even like, the hypnosis. Because remember I said to you, and I know we spoke about this a smidge in season 1, was that I would do the hypnosis and fall asleep. And I was always like, is this working? Like, is this bad that I'm falling asleep during this? So can you talk more about what can work for the subconscious mind?
Yeah. And acknowledging that piece of, is this bad that I fell asleep? And I was like, no, it's actually great. Your nervous system just is coming down, and it's coming all the way down, because once we relax, it kind of finally needs that rejuvenation. And then eventually you stop falling all the way asleep and you're able to hold yourself in that kind of middle trance-like state in the hypnosis. So for subconscious rewiring, because some people like make it this really mystical thing, like, oh, I'm going to rewire my subconscious and I'm going to listen to this hypnosis. And I love hypnosis. At the same time, it can be as simple as shift your focus during the day. Pay attention to what are you focused on, and then shift it. And that is rewiring your mind, because you're shifting attention. So strengthening your ability to doing that throughout the day, I'm at this point where I kind of think that is almost more powerful, because you are spending a lot of waking hours during the day, right? You could sit down in a 20-minute hypnosis, and yes, it absolutely has benefits and can help you, kind of like the device helps you, right? It's supportive. But then if you just go back to all your regular habits and ways of thinking during the 12 hours that you're awake, what is going to keep going further forward, right? The hours that you're awake, just because there's simply more repetition in it. So when I work with folks now, I certainly include those things like hypnosis, and there's a lot of focus on the day-to-day training. Where's your focus at during your waking hours?
Yeah, I love that. There were some good pearls in there that, well, that's like a promo clip waiting to happen. I hear it now. Okay, now we're going to address the person who's done a lot of work, okay, and they're seeing success, but all of a sudden there's a setback. So how do clients handle setbacks? What are some things that might help? Because I think maybe, maybe we think it's a linear journey. We all know it's not, but, they're doing so well. And then all of a sudden there's a setback. What are we doing to help them address that?
Yeah. And well, it's challenging. And so it's just acknowledging that and not going to judgment about it. It's like kind of all the things we know. We know it's not linear. We know not to go into judgment about it, but then we still get mad at ourselves and we're like, what? Why the hell am I going backwards? And so I tell people the healing journey is really kind of like a repeated slingshot. You get in the sling, you pull back and you slingshot forward and then you land. And then you get in the sling there, you pull back and you slingshot forward and you land, right? So it's kind of like you jump forward and then you land in that spot and then you kind of pull back in order to slingshot forward. So when people have that in their mind, it makes more sense energetically what they're experiencing, which is, okay, I go forward and I'm doing all these habits and great things. And then, well, summer happened and then I went on vacation and maybe I wasn't eating the way that feels good to my body, or maybe I wasn't moving, or I dropped my meditation or things like that. It doesn't mean that you're starting all over because you had a setback or because you dropped some of these things. There's still a lot of momentum built from all these habits that you've created. So really it's just kind of picking one thing back up at a time, and then you jump on right where you're at and you go forward again. So when people can have ease with this, right, and not go into like doomsday, oh my God, I've set back, and not see it like that, then it's a lot easier to just keep moving forward. Because ultimately we have to remind ourselves we are human, we are imperfect in this process, right? And so it's just like having a lot of grace with ourselves is essential.
Yeah, for sure. Progress over perfection. It's what we always preach, and
100%.
you have to have it, because that perfectionist mindset will send you right back to where we were at the beginning of this conversation, right? With the negative self-talk and all of that. So now I'm going to address something, and I might be speaking more to my fellow coaches than I'm speaking to even clients on this one, or patients, but I hear a lot of imposter syndrome. What's the first step in changing this mindset? There is so much of it, and I know you work. I also want to let people know that you work with people who are entrepreneurs, and from a business standpoint, this is not just nervous system regulation for chronically sick people. You're trying to change mindset. So I'm sure when you're dealing with those kind of people that you do have to talk about imposter syndrome a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting because the label simply identifies a perceived limitation for someone. It's like, and then once they overly identify with the label, it's like, well, I have imposter syndrome, so I can't do it. Like, and I'm like, well, so you just don't believe you can do it. Like, that's it, right? It's like, so kind of, demystifying this like label, because everyone's just like kind of so proud to identify with it. And so what I want folks to get around that is that when you go into doing something new, it's going to stretch your nervous system, right? It goes back to the basics. It's going to stretch your nervous system. It's going to stretch your belief system about where you're at. And so you will do things that feel scary. And it's like, how can I resource and regulate my nervous system so that I can start to tolerate this? I remember when I switched from like working my 9 to 5 and doing all that to working for myself, and I first started putting my own programs out there, my own groups and things like that. Even though I'd run groups in person a lot, doing it online, I would like break out in hives on my neck and my chest, like over and over again. And I was like, I knew I was nervous going into these calls because it was stretching myself. But I was mindful at the time to not label it as imposter. I'm like, I know I have the skills to do this. I'm just putting myself in a new territory here. And so, of course, and now, luckily, that doesn't happen now that I've gotten more comfortable with it, right? And so it's really just, it brings people right back to the basics. It's like, okay, you got to be able to learn to regulate your nervous system in these kind of higher stakes things. What are your beliefs that you're telling yourself about this? Because that's all going to impact how you show up and how you perform, so to speak. So it is really a lot of the similar stuff that I teach folks with chronic illness as well as my entrepreneurs. They're just applying it differently.
That's what I wanted to get to, is that you can apply all of this to many different things. It doesn't have to just be the chronically sick. Last time we talked, Drink Botanique was like in its fledgling stages, and now here we are. So everyone's going to want an update on that and where they can get it. And I see all the progress and all the work you guys have put in. So give everyone an update.
Yeah, I love it. Well, so it was like 15, 16 months of research and development and doing all that. And we're just so excited. So we're moving forward on launching our first flavor, calamansi mango. And these are functional beverages for folks that don't know. They have nice clean ingredients like extracts and juices. And then we put ashwagandha, L-theanine, passion flower, and lemon balm in them just to give you a nice little, again, nervous system support boost. And so I'm so excited. We're hoping to be live, I would say October, November on Amazon. That's where you'll be able to find it. But to stay up with us on updates, we're at Drink Botanique on Instagram and TikTok. And so we're announcing there constantly the progress and just sharing our journey, because we just thought it'd be fun to just be transparent about what it takes to start a new business, especially one that I'm like, I don't know about. So it's very much a learn as you go kind of process. So we're so excited because the drinks are tasting awesome.
Yeah, this sounds awesome. I can't wait to try it. Also, you just I know you always got a lot going on and a lot new. So, give people a sense of how else there are a lot of different ways to take in your information. So give them all the ways that they can connect and get your wisdom.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. So I'm still at Kreft's Couch on Instagram and TikTok. And currently through there, you can work with me in my office hours membership. This is where people come once a week to ask me anything. And I provide facilitation and my feedback on that. And so I really love that experience. I'm also doing a lot of accessible stuff right now because I know with the state of the economy and all that stuff. So I've teamed up with Daily Ohm, which is a huge wellness brand. I'm so excited. And so I've been creating courses on there, doing live workshops and whatnot. And so I have one course is live right now, Heal Yourself with Polyvagal Theory. So if people are really interested in all the nervous system stuff, along with energetics, I go into that there. And then I have a new course launching. It should be sometime in late fall, around cellular healing and emotional healing. They haven't nailed down the title yet. But that'll be around, again, energetics and emotional healing. So I'm just excited because those courses are at great prices, accessible for everyone.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. Like I was saying to you earlier, I've taken some courses on there and it's a really super cool operation. So it's great that you're a part of it. And I know people are going to want to connect with you. And of course, we thank you for coming on to contribute to the podcast. Always love having you and love having the conversation.
My pleasure. Thank you.
That's a wrap for this episode of Ripple Effect Connection. I hope this podcast helped you understand the huge role that stress plays in our thoughts and our everyday lives. I hear it all the time. I'm not stressed. But the chances are, if you're not feeling well, this absolutely plays a huge role in why that's the case. I appreciate Dr. Kreft taking the time to share her wisdom with us, and I hope you will share this with everyone you know, because this is a podcast that everyone needs to hear. It's something we all need to focus on. Feel free to connect with me anytime on social media and let me know what resonated with you. Reach out on Instagram at WholeHealthChristy. You can also get the full show notes for this and all my episodes on my website, christyhugick.com/podcast. I've got a brand new website with all new coaching offerings for you too, and there's more to come. Next, spread the inspiration. Like, follow, review, and share this podcast with others who may benefit from this information. Stay tuned for the next episode of Ripple Effect Connection. Let's create waves of change together.